Hello everyone, this is Crypto Bit Law, here with another blockchain legal brief, and today we're going to discuss government regulators and how they approach blockchain analytics. But before we dive in, please, if you like this content, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. And with that said, let's jump right on it. Okay, so as we can see here, Darknet Live reports NYDFS issues blockchain analytics guidance for companies. New guidance from the New York State Department of Financial Services mandates the use of blockchain analytics services for cryptocurrency businesses licensed in New York. The New York State Department of Financial Services, or NYDFS, which is the government body responsible for regulating the banking and finance sector of entities subject to New York's laws, recently issued the, quote, guidance on use of blockchain analytics, clarifying some of the requirements for all virtual currency business entities licensed under the state's BIT license or chartered under New York banking law. As the first guidance from a state regulatory body covering blockchain analytics, some legal commentators believe it will be the model for future regulations in different states. Other regulators and law enforcement will likely start looking to this guidance to inform their own best practices for crypto monitoring going forward, and those in the industry would be well served by internalizing and implementing these guidelines, regardless of their jurisdiction, an author at the National Law Review wrote. And an excerpt from the guidelines states, the purpose of this guidance from the New York State Department of Financial Services, or the department, is to emphasize to all virtual currency business entities that are either licensed under 23 NYCRR Part 200 or chartered as a limited purpose trust company under the New York banking law, collectively VC entities, the importance of blockchain analytics to effective policies, processes, and procedures, including, for example, those relating to customer due diligence, transaction monitoring, and sanctions screening. Financial activity involving virtual currency can involve, among other things, different sources, destinations, and types of funds flows that are found in more traditional fiat currency context. For example, virtual currency such as Bitcoin and Ether can be transferred peer-to-peer directly from one individual or entity to another pseudo-anonymously, absent the use of a regulated third party. For example, between non-custodial wallets or self-hosted wallets that allows users to maintain control of their private keys. Thus, to effectively address compliance requirements under the New York Banking Law and the New York Financial Services Law, as well as Federal Bank Secrecy Act and Anti-Money Laundering, BSA-AML, and Office of Foreign Asset Control's OFAC requirements, VC entities must be sure that their compliance programs fully take into account the unique characteristics of virtual currencies. While such characteristics present compliance challenges, they also present new possibilities for control measures that leverage these new technologies. For example, virtual currencies by their nature typically enable provenance tracing, in other words, review of previous transfers or hops along the public blockchain ledger or on-chain, so to speak. Put differently, the blockchain ledger's immutability typically allows a historical view of a virtual currency transmission between wallet addresses, providing the opportunity for greater visibility into transaction lineage than is typically found with traditional fiat fund transfers. A VC entity's risk mitigation strategies must take into account the VC entity's business profile to assess risk across types of virtual currencies and effectively address the specific characteristics of any particular virtual currency involved. For most virtual currencies, information stored on-chain includes certain identifying information, such as sending and receiving wallet addresses, time and date, and the value of the transaction. However, as suggested above, these wallet addresses are typically pseudo-anonymous, with nothing on the face of the transfer tying back to the originator, beneficiary, or underlying beneficial owners. In addition, the effectiveness of existing blockchain analytics tools can vary depending on the particular virtual currency in question. Given the above-noted characteristics of virtual currencies, the department emphasizes the importance of blockchain analytics to VC entities in addressing, for example, anti-money laundering requirements under 23 NYCRR Section 200.15, and across a range of BSA, AML, and OFAC-related compliance controls, including, but not limited to, augmenting Know Your Customer or KYC-related controls, conducting transaction monitoring of on-chain data activity, and conducting sanctions screening of on-chain activity. VC entities can use third-party service providers or internally developed blockchain analytics products and services for additional control measures, whether separately or in combination. To the degree that VC entities outsource such control functions, the VC entities must have clearly documented policies, processes, and procedures with regard to how the blockchain analytics activity integrates into the VC's entity's overall control framework consistent with the VC entity's risk profile. As part of their KYC responsibility, VC entities must obtain and maintain information regarding and understand and effectively address the risks presented by their customers and potential customers. Potentially useful in this regard are products and services that allow their users to obtain identifying information, for example, a location of a wallet address on a specific exchange for custodial transactions, that ties directly to the pseudo-anonymous on-chain data, particularly in combination with customer-provided information. So for those of you that are unaware, they're using KYC. Whenever you sign up with a centralized exchange, you KYC, and they're using the knowledge and the information that you give these centralized exchanges to tie the funds that you purchase to a crypto address that you withdraw to on the outside, right? All right, so continuing on. These products and services typically can identify wallet addresses associated with an institution, for example, a VC entity, as well as known high-risk wallet addresses such as darknet marketplaces, but such tools may not be able to identify underlying owners, including ultimate beneficial owners, and may have limited attribution capability, absent further off-chain verification methods integrating customer-provided data. For example, VC entities must have policies, processes, and procedures to assess counterparty exposure for virtual currency funds, for example, beneficiary institutions for outbound transfers. For example, certain vendor products or internally developed tools provide numerical scores or tiered rankings to represent the risk of the counterparty institution, typically based on on-chain transaction data supplemented with other factors such as strength of the institution's BSA/AML program. VC entities must also have in place appropriate control measures to monitor and identify unusual activity tailored to the VC entity's risk profile. Accordingly, it is important for VC entities to have policies, processes, and procedures for the tracing of transaction activity for each type of virtual currency the entity supports and the flow of funds through the blockchain for any inbound or outgoing activity, often described as provenance tracing or transaction tracing. For example, FinCEN recently noted, quote, "It is critical that all financial institutions, including those with visibility into CVC, convertible virtual currency flows, identify and quickly report suspicious activity associated with potential sanctions evasion, and conduct appropriate risk-based customer due diligence or, where required, enhanced due diligence. For instance, it is important that VC entities evidenced appropriately tailored transaction monitoring coverage against applicable typologies and red flags, identify deviations from the profile of a customer's intended purposes, and address other risk considerations as applicable. Relevant typologies related to virtual currency business activity include, but are not limited to, assessing whether a virtual currency 1 has substantial exposure to a high-risk or sanctioned jurisdiction, 2 is processed through a mixer or tumbler, 3 is sent to or from darknet markets, 4 is associated with scams or ransomware, and 5 is associated with other illicit activity relevant to the VC entity's business model. Documentation must describe case management and escalation processes with clearly delineated roles and responsibilities across the business and compliance functions, including the VC entity's approach where there are any doubts, e.g. related to the source of the funds. The department also emphasizes the importance of risk-based policies, processes, and procedures to identify transaction activity involving virtual currency addresses or other identifying information associated with sanctioned individuals and entities listed on the SDN list or located in sanctioned jurisdictions, and OFAC notes transaction monitoring and investigation software can be used to identify transactions involving virtual currency addresses or other identifying information. For example, the originator, the beneficiary, originating and beneficiary exchanges, underlying transactional data, so on and so forth, associated with sanctioned individuals and entities listed on the SDN list or other sanctioned lists, or located in sanctioned jurisdictions. And returning to the article, it states, CipherTrace and Chainalysis must be making a killing, considering that New York is implementing these guidelines, pretty much requiring Chainalysis to be a part of the processes and procedures of these centralized exchanges that are licensed to operate out of the state of New York. Now, another one that we mentioned in our thumbnail was Bitfury, and for those of you that are unaware, it's former Binance U.S. CEO Brian Brooks, who I think worked as the comptroller in the U.S. federal government. he left Binance and went to work at Bitfury, which provides blockchain analytics and mining equipment. So continuing on, they say, the New York State Department of Financial Services alleges that the state's regulations for cryptocurrency businesses, quote, ensure that New Yorkers have a well-regulated way to access the virtual currency marketplace and that New York remains at the center of the technological innovation and forward-looking regulation. Of course, after the introduction of New York's Bit license in 2015, Kraken, Bitfinex, Shapeshift, Paxful, and many others left the state. Continues, the New York State Assembly just passed a bill that places a 2-year ban on proof-of-work mining operations that rely on a, quote, carbon-based fuel as part of an Earth Day package. Supporters allege that people are getting too sweaty in New York. The state Senate has not yet voted on the bill, though. In March, the European Parliament Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs voted against a draft of the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulatory Framework that would have banned proof-of-work mining. All right, so for those of you that are still with us, I know that that was a lot of jargon, a lot of gobbledygook, a lot of legalese, and just, terms of art that were kind of strewn together. Here's the big takeaway. New York, in particular, they want to implement blockchain analytics to help beef up KYC, AML procedures, stop money laundering, and help enforce with sanctions. And they want to be aware of any suspicious transactions and put a clamp down on darknet markets. Any sort of, nefarious type of activity that you could ever really dream up that could be conducted with crypto. And they want Chainalysis to be embedded into these licensed exchanges, due in large part to enforce that goal of, keeping their thumb on the pulse of what's going on with any sort of nefarious activity. The reason why this is so important, I know it's only one state, but you have to recognize that New York is pretty much the financial epicenter or hub of the world. It's where Wall Street is. It's where a lot of the biggest companies in the world operate out of. Most of the financial markets at some point, they touch New York. The funds, they'll flow through New York, or New York will have some sort of an effect on those markets. And so, as was stated earlier on in this article, it's a pretty big deal what happens in New York, and they're taking the lead in the initiative trying to implement these rules and regulations with the anticipation that other states and other jurisdictions will follow suit and use this guide as a model for how they're going to implement their strategies with respect to blockchain analytics as they pertain to centralized exchanges. Now, we all know that DeFi is one way around having to deal with KYC, AML. But the problem is, if you ever really hope to off-ramp your crypto into actual fiat currency to pay things that you can only pay for with fiat currency, for example, taxes, rent in certain places, think of certain things that you can't yet pay for in Bitcoin or other cryptos yet, things that are fiat only at this point. If you're going to off-ramp, you're going to have to go to a centralized exchange like this. And at some point, they're going to have their finger on the pulse of when, how, and where you're moving your money, or your crypto, rather. So I just think that it's an important development that it helps to at least be aware of. We've been on this theme lately of discussing a lot of these nefarious and criminal-related activities that have just kind of been popping up in the news. And to me, they're interesting and fascinating. But I mean, for those of you that are considering doing anything that isn't really kosher or above board with crypto, and thinking you might evade Johnny Law, I mean, think again. A lot of the rules, the regulators, they're hip to this now, and they're coming in full force. And as we could see, they've crafted some pretty strong language and some pretty tight guidelines with how they intend for centralized exchanges to act, especially as it pertains to blockchain analytics, tracing the flow of crypto through the blockchain, from transaction, UTXO to UTXO. And, that's the thing about the blockchain that a lot of people don't understand, is that, I mean, the blockchain, it's public, and the blockchain is forever. You can't hide on the blockchain. And that's why it really grinds my gears when, a lot of these politicians, they get up there and they say things like, oh, crypto is, being used for all these criminal-related activities, and a lot of, the sanctions evasions and, the drug smugglers, they're using crypto. Well, au contraire. I mean, most of the criminal activity that's taken place is done with cash. Think about it. If you're a criminal, are you going to want to have a permanent record of your transaction that exists forever on a public ledger that's immutable on the blockchain? Or would you rather just deal in cash where it's one and done and there's no record whatsoever? I mean, think about it. I mean, it does not make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. And so I think that that's one of the buried leads here. You know, it's that issue that we just talked about, preference for crypto for criminal activity. I mean, that just doesn't hold water. And I think it's what a lot of these politicians, they fail to recognize and understand when they get out there making all of these outlandish, hypocritical claims. So, interesting development. I know that this one was a little more dense than some of the other ones, but I think important nonetheless. And so, hope you guys enjoyed this. Please, if you did, give us a like, hit the thumbs up, and please also subscribe to our channel. We'd really appreciate that. And with that said, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video.